to Armchair Arcade's first video article, Atari 2600 Mega Mini Reviews, Part 1. I'm Loguidice, coming to you today from inside the four walls of my workshop. Today we'll be covering 5 shooting games for Atari's venerable 2600 video computer system. Now, I could review these games using an emulator on a PC with the Stelladaptor. I could use an Atari 7800 in compatibility mode and the system's standard joystick. I could use Coleco's expansion module number 1 if I wanted an extra bulky option. Here's the module without the required ColecoVision or Atom. So yes, there are those options and many others, but why not go for the real thing? Here's Atari's sleeker 1980s version, the Junior, a real 2600. Now that we have the system of choice, what control to use? I could use this Coleco Atom controller, this Sega Genesis controller, or even Coleco's Super Action controller. In fact, there are dozens of control options for the system, but as with using a real 2600, I'll be using a real 2600 joystick, the famous CX40. So with the strict review standards set, using original hardware to determine our reviews, let's bring out the original cartridge games. Our first game is Chopper Command from Activision. Our second game is Defender from Atari. We only need one. Our third game is Fantastic Voyage from 20th Century Fox. Our fourth game is Space Cavern from Games by Apollo Inc. Our fifth and final game is Space Jockey by US Games. So without further ado, let's look at Chopper Command.
According to the manual, the object of the game is to accumulate as many points as possible by knocking out enemy aircraft, while protecting yourself and your truck convoys at the same time. Chopper Command is Activision's attempt at a Defender clone, and as you can tell from the smooth and detailed graphics and the sound effects, it looks and sounds good doing it. Your chopper has unlimited shots and can move left or right on a scrolling screen. Enemy craft can hit both your chopper and your trucks on the ground. Your chopper can also accidentally crash into the trucks. The scanner at the bottom of the screen acts like a radar. The gameplay is very challenging even on the easiest level, but the controls, even with the inertia effect when you turn your copter, are very responsive, which is important for what is essentially a pure action scrolling shooter. There are 2 difficulty levels with options for 1 or 2 alternating players. Overall, despite the high difficulty, Chopper Command is a must-play and a shining example of the Atari 2600 capabilities. I give Chopper Command an excellent 4 out of 5 stars.
Now let's look at Defender.
According to the manual, Atari Defender is very similar to the Williams coin-operated Defender arcade game, except for some differences in gameplay, graphics, and control. Okay, despite the optimistic manual where the glass is half full, the actual 2600 interpretation of the original arcade game leaves much to be desired. Taking Defender's multi-button control scheme and translating it to the Atari's single-button joystick was obviously a tough challenge. If the player's ship goes to the top of the screen, pushes up and presses the button, the player's ship will go in hyperspace, appearing randomly elsewhere. If the player's ship goes to the bottom of the screen and pushes the button, the smart bomb eradicates every enemy visible on the screen. While the game mechanic is still fun, especially when shooting an enemy ship and trying to catch and then safely land the humanoids you're trying to protect, There is very little sense of movement and everything is a bit sluggish. The graphics flicker badly. In fact, when you fire a shot, your ship vanishes, making for some interesting enemy evasion tactics. Sound is adequate. There are 20 different difficulty levels, and even a training variation. Overall, Defender is a decent shooter with poor presentation, mediocre control, and some unusual design choices. I give Defender a fair 2.5 out of 5 stars.
Let's move on to Fantastic Voyage.
Fantastic Voyage is based on a 1966 movie starring Raquel Welch and was part of Fox's decision to use many of its licenses like MASH and Porky's. Yes, Porky's. Anyway, as licenses go, Fantastic Voyage is actually a good property to base a game off of. The player's ship is injected into the bloodstream of a critically ill patient, and it's the player's job to blast through artery obstacles and eventually destroy a blood clot, which is like a simple boss enemy. When the game starts, the player's ship is steadily carried forward. As time passes, the artery walls get smaller and smaller until the clot is reached and eventually destroyed. Play starts over from there. There are 6 single-player difficulty options. The graphics are simple but smooth, and the sound effects, while sparse, are interesting, changing to reflect the patient's worsening or improving condition. Overall, the game is fun, if slightly repetitive, and offers a good sense of urgency. I give Fantastic Voyage a good 3 out of 5 stars.
Space Cavern.
I won't bother getting into the convoluted premise for this game. Instead, I'll explain that you're a spaceman who has to shoot flying enemies above you and running enemies to your left or right. Interestingly, to get around the Atari 2600's simple control scheme, the player moves the spaceman left and right with the joystick and fires up with the action button, and, to shoot left and right, the player pushes the joystick either up or down. There are 48 variations that include difficulty and enemy characteristics, and 1 or 2 players, but it's still the same surprisingly easy game no matter which variation you choose. The graphics are weak. In fact, the flying enemies look like Mexican piñatas, and the sound effects are a mishmash, in fact, sounding like they were pulled from other Atari games like Defender and Berserk. Overall, the game is boring and repetitive, is too easy to play, and has a poor presentation. I give Space Cavern a poor 1.5 out of 5 stars.
And finally, Space Jockey.
Space Jockey is a pure shoot-and-evade game that dwarfs the side-scrolling. There are 16 single-player variations, which modify everything from how the player's saucer moves, such as only up or down or all over the screen, and shoots, such as straight or steerable, to how the enemy craft react, including the ability to collide with the player's saucer. Oddly enough, the artist rendering of the play screen on the front of the box does not do the game's graphics justice. They're colorful and detailed, and everything scrolls smoothly. Sound is adequate, but a bit too repetitive and crowded. Different play variations make the game seem like subtly different shooters, and the graphics are pleasing. After extended play, turning down the sound is probably the best way to keep your sanity. I give Space Jockey a good 3 out of 5 stars.
I hope you enjoyed today's video article. Until next time, Bill Judas for Armchair Arcade, signing out.